Michael Reed hadn't allowed himself to hope in 3 years, not since the doctors told him his 15-year-old daughter Emma had maybe 6 months left to live. But he'd learned to carry that weight quietly, the way you carry a stone in your pocket until you forget it's there, until it becomes part of you. Tonight, driving home on this empty Minnesota highway with snow hammering his windshield like a million tiny fists, he found himself doing the math again. 3 year, 1,095 days, and Emma was still breathing, still laughing sometimes, though the sound was getting weaker. The disease was patient, more patient than he could afford to be, and the bills on his kitchen table had started to look less like numbers and more like a countdown. The Chevy's heater struggled against the -15 outside. Michael hunched forward, knuckles white on the steering wheel. His paycheck from the warehouse wouldn't clear until Friday, and Emma's medication was running out. $217 per dose. He had $23 in his checking account. The truck's engine made a concerning knock, something in the timing belt probably. Another problem he couldn't afford to fix. If it broke down out here 15 miles from home in this blizzard, he was screwed. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m., which meant he was late again. Emma would be awake waiting, probably pretending she wasn't worried. She always did that, tried to make things easier for him, even when her own body was giving up piece by piece. He'd left the warehouse 3 hours ago, but his supervisor had caught him at the door with another assignment. Just one more pallet to move, just one more truck to unload. Michael never said no. He couldn't afford to. The warehouse job paid $9 an hour, barely enough to cover utilities, and it was the only place that would hire a 52-year-old mechanic whose hands shook from exhaustion most days. His real job, the one he'd lost 2 weeks ago, when the garage shut down, that had paid something close to a living wage. 30 years as an auto mechanic, specialized training in European luxury cars certification, after certification on his wall, all worthless now. Johnson's Auto Shop had been the last place in town that valued experience over a fancy degree. Now he was down to the warehouse night shift and whatever odd repairs he could pick up on weekends. The wipers fought a losing battle against the snow. Michael reached up to clear condensation from the inside of the windshield with his sleeve. Rick from the warehouse had offered to lend him $50 until payday, but Michael had refused. Rick had 3 kids of his own to feed, and besides, 50 wouldn't cover even a quarter of Emma's medication. The granulomatosis with polyangiitis, GPA, the doctors called it, was eating away at Emma's kidneys and lungs, an autoimmune disease so rare that most doctors had to look it up. Michael had memorized every detail, the way her immune system attacked her own blood vessels, the granulomas forming in her lungs, the protein leaking through her damaged kidneys. The snow thickened visibility, dropping to just a few feet. Michael slowed the truck, peering through the hypnotic swirl of white. He couldn't afford to wreck the truck, couldn't afford to miss work, couldn't afford another hospital stay. The monthly maintenance treatment was bankrupting him, but the experimental therapy that might actually slow the disease that cost $200,000. His lawsuit against Northeast Insurance for denying coverage was his only hope, a Hail Mary pass in the final seconds of a game he was losing badly. Something red flashed through the curtain of white hazard lights blinking on the shoulder of the road. A luxury car, its sleek lines half buried in drifting snow. Michael's first instinct was to keep driving. He was already late. Emma needed her evening medication, the one that cost $217 per dose, and wasn't covered by the insurance he couldn't afford anyway. The pills were running low. He'd been rationing them, cutting doses in half, telling himself it was fine, that the doctors were just being cautious with their recommendations. But his foot hit the brake before his brain finished the thought. The truck's slowed tires crunching on packed snow, and he pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of the stranded vehicle. For a moment, he just sat there, engine idling, watching the snow. What was he doing? He had no time for this, no energy, no room in his life for anyone else's crisis. Then he saw her, a figure standing beside the Lexus, barely visible through the blizzard. She was trying to use her phone, her movements sharp with frustration. Michael sighed, reached for the door handle, and stepped out into the storm. The snow hit him like a punishment, cold and relentless, soaking through his jacket in seconds. He trudged toward the Lexus, squinting against the wind. The woman looked up as he approached, and even in the dim glow of the hazard lights, he could see she was dressed for a boardroom, not a blizzard. Cashmere coat, leather gloves, designer boots now ruined by snow and road salt. Car trouble. Michael hunched his shoulders against the driving snow. The woman hesitated, sizing him up. He didn't blame her. It was late, the road was empty, and he probably looked exactly like the kind of person she'd been taught to avoid, 6 feet of exhaustion in a worn work jacket, 3 days stubble, and eyes too tired to smile. My car just died. No warning. I've been trying to call for a tow, but there's no signal out here. Her voice was precise, cultivated the kind that expected to be listened to. Michael nodded and moved toward the front of the car. Mind if I take a look? She stepped back, still clutching her phone, and Michael popped the hood. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, a habit from his garage days, and examined the engine. It didn't take long to find the problem. The serpentine belt had snapped, probably from age, in the extreme cold, and without it, nothing worked. Simple fix, but not something you could do on the side of a highway in a blizzard. Not without the right parts and tools. Your serpentine belt's gone. You're not going anywhere tonight. Not in this car. Michael straightened up, closing the hood. The woman's face fell. For a second, she looked less like the polished professional she was trying to project, and more like someone who just realized how alone she was. How far to the nearest town? About 15 miles. Michael wiped snow from his face. The temperature was dropping and the Lexus's heater wouldn't work without the belt. She couldn't stay here. I can give you a lift. There's a hotel just off the exit. You can call a tow from there. She studied him again, that same careful assessment. Michael understood. Trust was a luxury, especially for women alone on dark roads. I don't even know your name, she said finally. Michael Reed. He didn't offer his hand. Seemed pointless in the blizzard. I'm a mechanic, or I was. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just trying to get home to my daughter. Something shifted in her expression at the mention of his daughter. The wariness didn't disappear, but it softened slightly. Elizabeth Chambers. She brushed snow from her sleeve with a gloved hand. You should get your things. It's only getting colder. Elizabeth hesitated just a moment longer, then nodded. She reached into her car and pulled out a leather briefcase and a small overnight bag. Michael helped her trudge through the deepening snow to his truck. He cleared off the passenger seat, embarrassed by the fast food wrappers and coffee cups. This wasn't the professional courtesy he used to show customers at the garage, but nothing about his life was professional anymore. They rode in silence for the first few miles, the only sound the rhythm of the wipers and the snow pounding on the roof. Michael kept his eyes on the road, acutely aware of every minute ticking past. Emma would be worried by now. She always worried when he was late, though she tried to hide it behind jokes and easy smiles. At 15, she'd already learned to carry more than any kid should have to. You said you have a daughter. Elizabeth's voice broke the silence, the words careful, as if testing the air between them. Yeah. Michael's voice was flat, not inviting conversation. How old? 15. Elizabeth waited, but Michael didn't elaborate. The silence stretched between them again, heavier this time. He checked the clock, 12:08. Nearly 2 hours late now. I had a son. Elizabeth turned to look out the passenger window at the swirling snow. He would have been 28 now. The past tense hung in the air like smoke. Michael glanced at her, saw the way she was staring at nothing. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. He was sick for a long time. We tried everything, every treatment, every specialist, every experimental trial we could find. But it was never enough, or it was too late, or the insurance wouldn't cover it, or we couldn't get him into the program in time. She laughed, a bitter sound. Funny how many ways there are to say the same thing. Your child is dying and you can't save them. Michael's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't want to have this conversation. Didn't want to think about what she was describing because it was too close to his own life. Too close to the nightmare he lived every day. I'm sorry, he said again. Because what else was there to say? That's why I started the foundation. Elizabeth continued, her voice steadier now. So other parents wouldn't have to go through what I did. So money wouldn't be the thing that decides who lives and who dies. Michael pulled into the hotel parking lot, the neon sign casting blue light across the snow-covered pavement. He put the truck in park, but left the engine running. Elizabeth gathered her things, preparing to leave. Then she paused and pulled out a business card from her wallet. Thank you for stopping, she said, handing him the card. Most people wouldn't have. Michael took it without looking at it, already thinking about the drive home, about Emma waiting. Someone helped me once when I needed it, just passing it forward. The words came automatically, something his father used to say. Elizabeth's hand was on the door handle, but she didn't open it. The foundation I mentioned, we help families with medical expenses. She hesitated, searching his face. If you ever need anything. She trailed off, reading something in his expression. Your daughter, she's sick, isn't she? It wasn't a question. Michael didn't answer. Didn't trust himself to speak. Elizabeth reached into her purse again and pulled out another card, pressing it into his hand on top of the first one. Call this number. Tell them I sent you. We can help. Michael looked down at the cards, finally reading them. Chambers Foundation for Medical Assistance. The words blurred slightly in the dim light. I can't afford charity, he said quietly. It's not charity, it's what should have always existed. Elizabeth opened the door, letting in a rush of cold air and snow. Call them Mr. Reed for your daughter. Then she was gone, hurrying toward the hotel lobby, and Michael was alone in his truck with 2 business cards that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. He shoved them into his pocket and pulled back onto the highway, pushing the speedometer higher than he should have, racing the clock and his own desperation. When he finally pulled into his driveway an hour later, the house was dark except for Emma's bedroom window. Michael sat in the truck for a moment, letting the engine die, feeling the exhaustion settle into his bones like winter cold. The snow had followed him home, piling up against the sides of the small rental house. Somewhere in his pocket, those business cards seemed to pulse with possibility and pride and shame, all tangled together. He climbed out of the truck and trudged to the front door, already rehearsing his apology. Emma would say it was fine, that she understood, that she wasn't worried, and he would pretend to believe her because that's what they did. That's how they survived. The house smelled like the chicken soup Emma had made for dinner, though Michael knew she probably hadn't eaten much of it. Her appetite had been disappearing along with everything else, her energy, her color, the easy way she used to move through the world. He found her in her room, propped up in bed with her laptop, the glow of the screen lighting her too pale face. You're late. Emma's attempt at a casual tone didn't mask the relief in her eyes. I know, I'm sorry. Michael sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. There was a woman with car trouble. I helped her get to a hotel. Emma smiled, that familiar mix of pride and exasperation. Of course you did. Then her expression shifted, became more serious. Dad, we're out of the evening pills. I checked. Michael's stomach dropped. He'd known they were low, but he'd been counting on making them last until Friday, until his paycheck cleared and he could afford the refill. I'll call the pharmacy in the morning. We'll figure it out. Emma looked at him for a long moment, her brown eyes too knowing, too old for her face. She got in her mother's eyes, thank God. Catherine's eyes and Catherine's face with Michael's stubborn chin. The combination used to make him laugh. Now it just reminded him of everything he stood to lose. Dad. Her voice was gentle. It's okay. We've gone without before. But it wasn't okay. Every missed dose meant more damage to her kidneys, more time for the disease to advance. The GPA was already stage 3. Another flare-up could push it to stage 4, and then, we'll figure it out, he repeated more firmly, and Emma nodded, letting it go because she always did, because she'd learned early not to push him on things that involved money or doctors or the slow collapse of their life together. How was work? Emma changed the subject, closing her laptop. Fine, the usual. Michael didn't mention his aching back, the supervisor's criticism, the way his vision had blurred from exhaustion toward the end of his shift. What about you? How's the blog? Emma's face brightened. That's where she'd been when he came in, updating her blog, Living with GPA. She'd started it a year ago, determined to help other kids with rare diseases feel less alone. The blog had a small but dedicated following, mostly other teenagers with chronic illnesses and their parents. I wrote about the new doctor, the one who actually listened to me instead of just talking to you. I got 3 comments already. Michael smiled, a real smile this time. Emma had always been a writer. Before she got sick, she'd filled notebook after notebook with stories and poems. The disease had taken so much from her, but not her voice, never that. They talked for another half hour, Emma telling him about her online classes, about the comments on her blog, about the book she was reading. Normal things, pretending they were a normal family having a normal night. Michael felt the business cards in his pocket, the whole time pressing against his leg like a guilty secret. Finally, Emma's eyelids started to droop, the exhaustion she'd been fighting winning out over her determination to stay awake with him. Michael kissed her forehead, too warm. Was she running a fever again, and turned off her bedside lamp. Night, Dad. Emma's voice was already thick with sleep. Night, sweetheart. I love you. Love you too. Michael stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the slight wheeze in her breathing that never went away anymore. Then he closed the door quietly and went to the kitchen. The bills were waiting for him on the table, arranged in neat stacks by Emma earlier that day. Past due. Final notice. Payment required immediately. Michael ignored them and went to the medicine cabinet instead. Emma's pill bottles were lined up in a row labeled with dates and times. The evening medication, the one that cost $217 per refill, had exactly 2 pills left. He took one out and cut it in half with the pill cutter, putting half back in the bottle. Half a dose was better than nothing. He filled a glass of water and carried it and the half pill back to Emma's room, slipping inside quietly. She was already asleep, but she needed to take her medication. He hated to wake her. Sleep was the only time she didn't hurt, but skipping a dose entirely wasn't an option. Emma, he touched her shoulder gently. Wake up for just a minute. You need to take your pill. She blinked awake, confused for a moment, then understanding. She took the pill and water without comment, either not noticing or pretending not to notice. It was only half the normal size. Michael helped her lie back down, tucking the blankets around her thin shoulders. Go back to sleep. I'll see you in the morning. She was asleep again before he reached the door. Michael returned to the kitchen and sat down heavily at the table. The business cards from Elizabeth Chambers were burning a hole in his pocket. He took them out and laid them next to the bills. The math was simple and brutal. Emma's maintenance medication cost nearly $4,000 a month. The experimental treatment her doctors wanted to try, the one that might actually slow the disease down, cost $200,000. His warehouse job paid maybe $1,500 a month after taxes. He had $23 in his checking account and a maxed-out credit card. The bills on the table represented debts he'd never be able to pay. Not in his lifetime. Michael picked up Elizabeth's card, turned it over in his hands. Call this number. Tell them I sent you. We can help. It sounded too easy, too good to be true. And pride was a funny thing. It could keep you warm even when you were freezing to death. Could fill your stomach even when you were starving. But pride couldn't save Emma. Pride wouldn't pay for the treatment she needed. He put the card back down and went to the living room without calling, telling himself he'd think about it tomorrow. That maybe something would change. Maybe a miracle would happen. Maybe he'd win the lottery, or find a bag of money, or wake up and discover this was all a nightmare. His phone rang, startling him. Unknown number. Probably a bill collector, but he answered anyway. Mr. Reed, this is Dr. Patel from Minnesota General. I'm calling about your daughter, Emma. Michael's heart stopped. Is she okay? Did something happen? Emma is fine, Mr. Reed. I'm calling because I received the lab results from her last visit. Her kidney function has decreased another 15% since last month. The GPA is progressing faster than we'd hoped. We really need to start the experimental treatment as soon as possible. Michael closed his eyes, squeezing the bridge of his nose. The experimental treatment. $200,000 he didn't have. Dr. Patel, we've discussed this. The insurance won't cover it, and I can't. I understand the financial constraints, Mr. Reed, but I need to be clear about the medical reality. Without this treatment, Emma's kidneys will continue to deteriorate. We're looking at complete renal failure within 6 to 8 months. Dialysis would be the next step, followed by transplant if we can find a match. Michael's free hand curled into a fist. He wanted to punch something. The wall, the window, the faceless insurance executives who had decided his daughter's life wasn't worth saving. I'm trying, Dr. Patel. I'm suing the insurance company. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm doing everything I can. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A sigh. I know you are Mr. Reed, and I'm not calling to add to your burden. I'm calling because there might be another option. There's a hearing for emergency Medicaid coverage next week. It's a long shot, but with Emma's condition deteriorating this rapidly, she might qualify. I've taken the liberty of submitting the initial paperwork. You'll need to appear before the review board on Tuesday. Hope the thing Michael hadn't allowed himself to feel in 3 years flickered to life and died just as quickly. Tuesday, he'd have to miss work, miss pay he couldn't afford to lose. I'll be there, he said, anyway. Good. My office will email you the details tomorrow. And Mr. Reed, try to get some rest. You can't help Emma if you collapse from exhaustion. Michael almost laughed. Rest. As if that were an option. He hung up and sat in the dark living room staring at nothing. The snow outside had stopped the world suddenly quiet, as if holding its breath. 6 to 8 months. That's what the doctor had said. 6 to 8 months before Emma's kidneys failed completely. Before they'd have to start dialysis 3 times a week, 4 hours each session. How would he work? How would Emma finish school? The lawsuit against Northeast Insurance had been his last hope, but it was moving at a glacial pace through the courts. His pro bono lawyer, Ms. Torres, was doing her best, but she had dozens of other cases. The last time they'd spoken, she'd warned him not to get his hopes up. Insurance companies had teams of lawyers whose sole job was to find loopholes to deny claims. Michael got up and went to the kitchen table again, staring at the business cards from Elizabeth Chambers. The Chambers Foundation for Medical Assistance. It seemed legitimate, but charity meant admitting defeat, meant acknowledging he couldn't take care of his own daughter, meant failing Catherine, who had made him promise to look after Emma when she was dying from injuries sustained in the car accident 5 years ago. He'd promised, and he was failing. Every day, in 1,000 small ways, he was failing. Michael took out his phone and searched for the Chambers Foundation. The website looked professional, established 10 years ago by Elizabeth Chambers after the death of her son Matthew from a rare autoimmune disorder. The foundation provided financial assistance to families of children with rare and chronic illnesses, covering treatments, medications, and experimental therapies not covered by insurance. They'd helped over 300 families in the past decade. It seemed too good to be true. There had to be a catch. Nothing in Michael's experience had taught him to trust in easy solutions or the kindness of strangers, especially not wealthy strangers. People like Elizabeth Chambers lived in a different world from people like him. A world where car trouble was an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. Where medical bills didn't mean choosing between electricity and food. He put his phone away without calling. Tomorrow. He'd think about it tomorrow. Michael went to the bathroom and stared at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized the man looking back at him. Gray threaded through his dark hair, now lines etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. He looked older than 52. Felt older, too. He remembered being 30, Catherine by his side, Emma, just a toddler. Working at the big dealership in Minneapolis, specializing in luxury European cars. Respected for his skill, his knowledge. They'd had plans, then a house with a yard college fund for Emma retirement someday. Normal things, ordinary dreams. Then came the layoff when the dealership downsized. The move to a smaller town, a smaller shop. Catherine's death, Emma's diagnosis, and now this, a rented house. He could barely afford a job that barely covered groceries and medical bills that stretched into numbers he couldn't comprehend. Michael showered quickly, the hot water running cold, before he was finished. Another thing he couldn't afford to fix. He changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt worn thin from too many washings and checked on Emma one more time. She was sleeping soundly, the half pill enough to ease her discomfort for now. Tomorrow he'd have to find a pharmacy that would let him make a partial payment, or borrow money from Rick after all, or sell something else, though he'd already sold nearly everything of value they owned. He went to his bedroom, once the dining room, now converted with a second-hand bed and a dresser to give Emma the larger bedroom. His laptop sat on the dresser, open to the legal documents for the lawsuit against Northeast Insurance. Ms. Torres had emailed them earlier that day asking him to review and sign. Michael sat on the bed and pulled the laptop onto his knees. The legal language swam before his tired eyes. Something about the case being transferred to a different judge due to a scheduling conflict. Judge Elizabeth Chambers of the Federal District Court would now be presiding over the initial hearing scheduled for next Friday. Judge Elizabeth Chambers. Michael stared at the name, his exhausted brain taking too long to make the connection. It couldn't be the same Elizabeth Chambers. Could it? He grabbed his phone and searched for Judge Elizabeth Chambers, Minnesota. The results showed a distinguished-looking woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair cut in a stylish bob. Federal judge for the past 8 years, known for her rulings on medical rights and insurance cases. Before that, a corporate attorney for 20 years, representing, among others, several major insurance companies. Michael clicked on an image, enlarging it. It was her, the woman from the stranded Lexus, the woman he'd driven to the hotel, the woman who was now going to decide whether Northeast Insurance had to pay for Emma's treatment. Michael's stomach twisted. This was bad, very bad. If he called the Chambers Foundation now after learning she was the judge in his case, it could look like he was trying to influence her ruling, like he was asking for a bribe. But if he didn't get help for Emma soon, 6 to 8 months, Dr. Patui had said, 6 to 8 months before complete renal failure. Michael closed the laptop and set it aside, his mind racing. He needed to call Ms. Torres, needed to tell her about the coincidental meeting with Judge Chambers, needed to ask if the judge should recuse herself from the case. But it was after midnight. That call would have to wait until morning. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Snow had started falling again, tapping gently against the window. In the next room, Emma's breathing wheezed softly through the thin wall. Michael listened to that sound, counting her breaths the way he used to count her steps when she was learning to walk. 1, 2, 3. Each one a victory. Each one proof she was still fighting. Tomorrow he would figure out the medication, and the judge situation, and the Medicaid hearing, and how to keep the electricity on for another month. Tomorrow he would be stronger, smarter, better. For Emma. Tonight, though, he let exhaustion claim him, pulling him down into darkness where for a few brief hours he didn't have to calculate the cost of staying alive. The alarm jerked Michael awake at 5 a.m. For a moment he didn't know where he was, what day it was. Then reality crashed back: Emma's medication, the insurance lawsuit, Judge Elizabeth Chambers. He silenced the alarm and lay still for a minute, gathering his strength for another day of impossible choices. He checked on Emma before leaving. She was still asleep, her breathing raspy but steady. Michael adjusted her blankets, feeling her forehead slightly warm, but not feverish, and left a note on her bedside table. Gone to work. Call if you need anything. Love you. It was still dark outside, the world muffled by a foot of fresh snow. Michael's truck started on the third try, the engine protesting the cold. The drive to the warehouse took twice as long as usual, the plows not yet out on the back roads. He clocked in at 6:58 a.m., 2 minutes before his shift started. The warehouse was massive, impersonal stacks of merchandise, stretching 30 feet toward the ceiling. Michael's job was simple: move boxes from one place to another, according to the electronic scanner in his hand. 10 hours of mindless physical labor that left his back screaming and his mind numb. Perfect for not thinking about everything falling apart around him. Rick found him during the first break at 9. Hey man, you look like hell. Michael managed a tired smile. His friend was right, he'd caught a glimpse of himself in the bathroom mirror, pale, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. Thanks, you always know just what to say. Rick handed him a coffee and sat beside him on the break room bench. Seriously though, you okay? Michael's first instinct was to say yes, to brush it off the way he always did, but he was too tired for the pretense. Emma's out of her meds. We've got maybe one more half dose. And the doctor called last night. Her kidneys are getting worse. Rick's face fell. Shit, Mike. I told you I can lend you some cash. It's not just the meds anymore. Michael took a sip of the coffee, black and bitter but hot. The doctor wants to start her on this experimental treatment. 200 grand and the insurance won't touch it. Rick let out a low whistle. Jesus, what are you going to do? The question hung in the air between them. What was he going to do? Sue an insurance company that had teams of lawyers and unlimited resources, beg for charity from a foundation run by the judge who was presiding over that very lawsuit? Watch his daughter's kidneys fail because he couldn't conjure $200,000 out of thin air? I don't know, Rick. I honestly don't know. They finished their break in silence. When the buzzer sounded, signaling the end of 15 minutes, Rick clapped Michael on the shoulder. The offer stands, man. Whatever you need. Michael nodded, grateful for the friendship, even as he knew he would refuse the money again. Rick had his own family to support, his own problems to solve. The rest of the shift passed in a haze of physical exertion and mental exhaustion. Michael lifted, carried, scanned, repeated. The mindlessness of it almost a relief. At least here in the warehouse, the problems had simple solutions. Box goes here, pallet goes there, scan this, move that. No moral dilemmas, no impossible choices. During lunch, he called Ms. Torres, his lawyer. He got her voicemail and left a message explaining the situation with Judge Chambers. Then he called the pharmacy, explaining about Emma's medication, asking if there was any way to get a partial refill until his paycheck cleared. The pharmacist was sympathetic, but firm insurance wouldn't cover a partial refill, and the cash price was still $217 per dose, whether he bought one pill or 30. By the time his shift ended at 5, Michael was no closer to a solution than he had been that morning. He clocked out, trudged through the snow to his truck, and sat there for a long moment staring at nothing. The temperature had dropped again well below zero now. The truck's heater blew cold air for the first 5 minutes of the drive. Michael's phone rang as he turned onto the main road. Ms. Torres returning his call. "Mr. Reed, I got your message about Judge Chambers. This is unexpected. Is it a problem? Will she have to recuse herself?" Michael kept his eyes on the road, the phone on speaker beside him. "Not necessarily. The fact that you helped her during car trouble and gave her a ride to a hotel doesn't automatically create a conflict of interest. It was a brief chance encounter with no financial or personal relationship established. However, you should disclose it at the beginning of the hearing. The judge will then decide whether she needs to recuse herself." "But what about the foundation? If I contact them about help for Emma, wouldn't that create a conflict?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Potentially, yes. The Chambers Foundation is directly associated with Judge Chambers. If you were to receive financial assistance from them while she's presiding over your case, it could create the appearance of impropriety." Michael's heart sank. "So I can either pursue the lawsuit with Judge Chambers, or I can seek help from her foundation, but not both." "That's correct, Mr. Reed. I would advise waiting until after the hearing to contact the foundation. The initial hearing is scheduled for next Friday. That's only 8 days away. The judge will likely make a decision on whether Northeast has to cover the treatment within a week or two after that. But Emma needed the medication now, needed the experimental treatment as soon as possible. Every day of delay meant more damage to her kidneys, more time for the disease to advance. Torres Emma's doctor says her kidney function has decreased another 15%. We're looking at complete renal failure in 6 to 8 months. We don't have time to wait for the legal process." Another pause. "I understand the urgency, Mr. Reed, but if you contact the Chambers Foundation now and then Judge Chambers rules in your favor, Northeast could appeal on the grounds of bias. That could delay the process even more." Michael rubbed his eyes, trying to think through the exhaustion. "So my choices are let my daughter's condition worsen while we wait for the legal system, or give up on the lawsuit and beg for charity." "Mr. Reed, Michael, I know this is incredibly difficult, but the law moves at its own pace. We can request an expedited hearing due to Emma's deteriorating condition, but there are no guarantees. In the meantime, have you considered the Medicaid hearing Dr. Patel mentioned? That could be a third option." Michael nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Yeah, that's on Tuesday. I'll be there." "Good. Focus on that for now. And Mr. Reed, try not to make any decisions about the Chambers Foundation until we've had a chance to discuss it further. I'll see what I can find out about expediting the case." She hung up, leaving Michael alone with the impossible choice. By the time he pulled into his driveway, darkness had fallen again, the temperature dropping even further. The house was dark except for the soft glow from Emma's bedroom window. Michael sat in the truck for a moment, gathering his strength for whatever waited inside. When he entered, the house was quiet. No smell of dinner cooking. No sound of Emma's laptop keys clicking. Just silence. Michael's heart rate picked up as he hurried to her room. Emma was asleep, her laptop open beside her. But powered off, her face was pale, her breathing labored. Michael touched her shoulder gently. "Em, you okay?" She blinked awake slowly, her eyes unfocused for a moment. "Hey, Dad." She managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired. Did you eat anything today? A little. The soup from yesterday. Then I fell asleep." "What time is it? After 6? Michael felt her forehead again. "Definitely warmer than this morning." "Are you feeling worse?" Emma tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. "Just tired," she repeated. "And my back hurts. Kidneys, probably." The casual way she said it broke Michael's heart. A 15-year-old shouldn't know which organ was causing her pain. Shouldn't accept suffering as normal. "Did you take your morning pills?" He already knew the answer to the evening dose. There was only half a pill left, and he'd been saving it. Emma nodded, then hesitated. "I only took half of each, trying to make them last." Her eyes met his, apologetic. "I know we're running low." Michael wanted to tell her not to worry, that he'd figure it out, that everything would be fine. But he'd never lied to her about her condition, and he couldn't start now. "I'm working on it, Em, I promise. The pharmacy won't do a partial refill, but my check clears tomorrow. I'll get them first thing in the morning." Emma nodded, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She knew as well as he did that the paycheck would barely cover rent and utilities, let alone $4,000 in medication. I could skip a few doses, Dad. It wouldn't be the first time. Michael shook his head firmly. No, absolutely not. We'll figure something out. I'll sell the truck if I have to. Emma's eyes widened. Dad, no, you need the truck for work. We'll be worse off if you lose your job. She was right, of course. Without the truck, he couldn't get to the warehouse, couldn't pick up repair jobs on weekends, couldn't get Emma to her doctor's appointments. But what choice did he have? Let me worry about that, Michael said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. You focus on resting. Do you want some dinner? I can heat up the soup. Emma nodded and Michael went to the kitchen, his mind racing. Sell the truck, borrow money, take out a payday loan at a criminal interest rate, beg the Chambers Foundation for help, and risk the lawsuit. There were options, all bad, all insufficient. He was heating the soup when his phone rang again. Unknown number. Michael answered warily, half expecting another bill collector. Mr. Reed, this is Jennifer Wilson from the Chambers Foundation. Judge Chambers asked me to reach out to you regarding your daughter's medical situation. Michael nearly dropped the phone. How what? He stammered, caught completely off guard. The woman on the other end of the line had a warm professional voice. I understand you haven't contacted us yet, but Judge Chambers was quite concerned about your daughter when you mentioned her last night. She asked me to reach out proactively. Michael's mind raced. This could jeopardize the lawsuit, could create exactly the conflict of interest as Torres had warned about. But Emma needed help now, not after some lengthy legal battle. Ms. Wilson, I appreciate the call, but there's something you should know. Judge Chambers is presiding over a lawsuit I've filed against my insurance company for denying coverage of Emma's treatment. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I see. That does complicate things. Let me check with the judge and call you back. In the meantime, could you share some information about your daughter's condition? It would help us understand the urgency. Before Michael could answer, he heard a key in the front door. He froze. No one else had a key to the house except Dad. I'm home. The door opened, and Michael's older brother David stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. I'm in the kitchen, Michael called, then returned to the phone. I'm sorry, Ms. Wilson. My brother just arrived unexpectedly. Can I call you back in a few minutes? Of course, you have my number now. Michael ended the call and turned to face his brother. David stood in the kitchen doorway, snow melting from his coat onto the linoleum floor. He was 5 years older than Michael, his hair more gray than brown, now his face weathered from decades working construction. Surprised, Dave said with a grin. Thought I'd stop by on my way through. How's my favorite niece? Michael forced a smile. She's okay. Tired. I was just heating up some soup for her. David's grin faded as he studied Michael's face. And how are you? You look like hell, little brother. I'm fine, just tired. Michael turned back to the stove, stirring the soup mechanically. David came into the kitchen, setting a duffel bag on the floor. I've got a job in Duluth for the next 2 weeks. Thought I'd crash here tonight if that's okay. Michael nodded. Of course. The couch is all yours. It's good to see you, Dave. Really, it had been 6 months since David's last visit. His brother lived 4 states away, taking construction jobs wherever they came up. He always sent money when he could, but his own finances were nearly as precarious as Michael's. David hung his coat on the hook by the door and rolled up his sleeves. So what's really going on? And don't say nothing. I know that look on your face. Michael sighed. There was no point lying to David. His brother could always see right through him. Emma's out of her meds. Her kidney function is getting worse. The doctor wants to start an experimental treatment that costs $200,000 and the insurance won't cover it. I'm suing them, but that could take months. And now, his phone rang again. The same unknown number. Ms. Wilson calling back. Michael hesitated, then answered. Ms. Wilson, can I call you back in an hour? I need to get my daughter some dinner and talk to my brother who just arrived. Actually, Mr. Reed, I've spoken with Judge Chambers. She's requesting a meeting with you tomorrow morning at the foundation office. 10 a.m. if that's possible. She believes we can find a way to help Emma without creating a conflict of interest for the lawsuit. Michael glanced at David, who was watching him with concern. I'll be there, he said finally. Excellent. The address is on the card Judge Chambers gave you. Bring any medical records you have for Emma. And Mr. Reed, try not to worry. We're very good at what we do." The call ended and Michael stared at the phone for a long moment. "Who was that?" David asked. "The Chambers Foundation. They help families with medical expenses for children with rare diseases. The director is a judge who's also presiding over my insurance lawsuit. I met her last night when her car broke down in the blizzard." David's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, what? You met the judge in your case by accident?" Michael nodded, then turned back to the soup, which was starting to simmer. "I helped her with her car, gave her a ride to a hotel, told her about Emma. She gave me a card for her foundation, but I didn't call. Now they're calling me. Want me to come in tomorrow morning." David whistled low. "That's either the luckiest coincidence of your life or the beginning of a massive legal clusterfuck." Michael laughed despite himself. His brother had always had a gift for cutting through the bullshit. "Yeah, that about sums it up. My lawyer says if I take money from the foundation while the judge is presiding over my case, it could look like bias. The insurance company could appeal if we win." David leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So you've got a meeting tomorrow. You going?" Michael ladled soup into a bowl for Emma. "I have to. Emma needs help now. Not after some drawn-out legal battle. Want me to come with you, fresh eyes, all that? And no offense, little brother, but you look like you haven't slept in a week. Might be good to have backup." Relief washed over Michael. "Thanks, Dave. That would be great." The brothers carried soup and toast to Emma's room, where she was delighted to see her uncle. Michael watched as she brightened, some color returning to her pale cheeks as she and David caught up. The tight knot in his chest loosened just a fraction. He wasn't completely alone in this. Not tonight, at least. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep again, Michael and David sat at the kitchen table, business cards and bills spread out between them. "So let me get this straight," David said, tapping the Chambers Foundation card. "This judge runs a foundation that could pay for Emma's treatment. $200,000. But if she does that, it might jeopardize your lawsuit against the insurance company that should be paying for the treatment in the first place." "That's about it," Michael agreed. "Plus, there's a Medicaid hearing next Tuesday that might get Emma coverage for the treatment. But even if we get approved, it could take weeks to process." David shook his head. "The system's fucked, Mikey. Makes no goddamn sense." Michael couldn't argue with that. The system was broken. Had been for a long time. But understanding that didn't help Emma. "What would Catherine say?" David asked quietly. Michael flinched at the mention of his late wife. Catherine had been the organized one, the planner, the one who could navigate bureaucracy and paperwork and insurance claims. She would have had spreadsheets and phone trees and a 3-ring binder full of options. She wouldn't have let things get this desperate. "She'd say Emma comes first," Michael said finally. "Everything else is just details." David nodded. "Then that's your answer. Go to the meeting tomorrow. Hear what the judge has to say. If there's a way to get Emma the treatment without screwing up the lawsuit, great. If not, I choose Emma. Every time." Michael finished the thought. No hesitation. The brothers talked late into the night, catching up on months of separation, carefully avoiding the heaviest topics: Catherine's death, Emma's prognosis, Michael's financial collapse. Some pains were too familiar to need discussion. Some fears too deep to voice. When David finally stretched out on the couch to sleep, Michael checked on Emma one more time, then went to his own room. He set his alarm for early. He'd need to call in to the warehouse, tell them he'd be late. Another mark against him, another step closer to being fired. But what choice did he have? Michael lay in the dark, listening to the sound of his brothers snoring through the thin wall, the occasional wheeze of Emma's breathing from the other bedroom. His family. What was left of it? Everything that mattered. Tomorrow he would meet with Judge Elizabeth Chambers and find out if she could offer a miracle. Or at least a reprieve. A little more time, a little more hope. That's all he was asking for. All he had ever asked for. Just enough to keep going. Just enough to keep Emma alive. Just enough to not fail completely at the one promise he'd made to Catherine as she lay dying. "I'll take care of our girl. I swear it. I'll keep her safe." The snow had stopped falling outside, the world utterly still. In that stillness, Michael made his decision. He would take whatever help was offered, legal complications be damned. For Emma. For Catherine. For the promise he refused to break, no matter the cost to his pride or his future. With that decided, he finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, the business cards from the Chambers Foundation still clutched in his hand like a talisman against the dark. The Chambers Foundation occupied a modest brick building near the courthouse, nothing like the gleaming corporate headquarters Michael had imagined. 2 weeks had passed since that snowy night encounter, 2 weeks of working double shifts at the warehouse of Emma, growing weaker by the day of medications running dangerously low. David had extended his stay, sleeping on the couch, picking up groceries, keeping Emma company when Michael had to work. The morning of the foundation meeting, Michael sat in his truck for long minutes before finding the courage to enter David waiting patiently beside him. Inside the reception area surprised him: warm lighting, comfortable seating walls decorated with children's artwork. The receptionist greeted them with genuine warmth, not the practiced politeness of medical offices Michael had grown to dread. "We're here to see Judge Chambers, Michael Reed and my brother David." Within minutes, they were shown to a conference room where Elizabeth Chambers waited, dressed in a simple sweater and slacks rather than the formal attire from their roadside encounter. Her steel gray hair was pulled back, her expression somber but kind. She recognized David immediately as Michael's brother, the family resemblance undeniable, and thanked them both for coming. "Judge Chambers, please call me Elizabeth," sat across from them, a folder open in front of her. "I've reviewed Emma's medical records, Mr. Reed. Her case is exactly the type our foundation was created to help." She looked directly at Michael, her gaze unwavering. "But first we need to address the legal complication." Michael nodded, tension coiling in his stomach. The lawsuit against Northeast Insurance hung between them, an invisible barrier. "My lawyer says if I accept help from your foundation while you're presiding over my case, it could create a conflict of interest. The insurance company could appeal if we win." Elizabeth folded her hands on the table. "She's absolutely right, which is why I've recused myself from your case as of yesterday afternoon. It's been reassigned to Judge Michaels in the Eastern District." Relief and disappointment warred in Michael's chest. Relief that the ethical dilemma was resolved, disappointment that he'd lost a judge who might have been sympathetic to his situation. "What does that mean for the lawsuit?" "It means no conflict of interest if you accept our help. But I need to be honest with you, Mr. Reed, Michael. Judge Michaels is known to be sympathetic to insurance companies. His rulings tend to favor corporate interests. Your case is still valid, still worth pursuing, but the odds have shifted." David leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "So you're saying he'll probably lose?" Elizabeth chose her words carefully, years of judicial restraint evident in her measured tone. "I'm saying the timeline becomes even more uncertain and the outcome less predictable. Insurance companies count on delays and uncertainty to pressure families into dropping lawsuits." Michael stared at his rough, work-worn hands on the polished conference table. Emma didn't have time for delays and uncertainty. She needed treatment now. But $200,000, he couldn't wrap his mind around a number that large. "How does your foundation work? What's the catch?" Elizabeth's expression softened. "No catch, Michael. The Chambers Foundation was established after my son Matthew died from an autoimmune disorder similar to Emma's. We couldn't get the experimental treatment he needed approved in time. The insurance company denied coverage, calling it investigational rather than medically necessary. By the time we won our lawsuit, Matthew was gone." The pain in her voice was raw even after a decade. Michael recognized it, the same pain that lived in his chest every day, the fear of losing Emma. But unlike Elizabeth, his nightmare hadn't become reality. Not yet. "The foundation helps families avoid what happened to us." Elizabeth continued, regaining her composure. "We cover medical expenses for children with serious illnesses, medications, treatments, experimental therapies not covered by insurance. We've helped over 300 families since we started. David, ever the practical one, cut to the heart of the matter. And in return, nothing's free in this world, Your Honor." Elizabeth met his skepticism with understanding. "We ask that families stay in touch, let us know how their children are doing. Some choose to volunteer later, helping other families going through the same thing. But there's no obligation, no repayment required." Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. The foundation would cover Emma's treatment, all of it, with no strings attached. It sounded too good to be true. Because in his experience, if something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. "Why me? Why Emma?" Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. "That night in the snow, you were exhausted, worried about your daughter. You had every reason to keep driving, but you stopped anyway." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Do you know how rare that is? You helped me without expecting anything in return. That's exactly the kind of person our foundation was created to help. Michael remembered that night the weight of exhaustion, the desperation to get home to Emma. I wasn't being noble, he insisted. I was just being decent. Elizabeth smiled, the expression warming her formal features. Being decent when you have nothing to give, Michael, that's the definition of nobility. The words settled over him, uncomfortable but warming. He wasn't used to praise, especially not from someone like Elizabeth, educated, wealthy, powerful. In his world, people like her didn't notice people like him except to give orders or deny claims. Yet here she was offering a lifeline based on a simple act of kindness in a snowstorm. They spent the next hour discussing Emma's case, her current treatment, the experimental therapy Dr. Patel wanted to try, the timeline for intervention. Elizabeth took notes, asked questions that revealed a surprisingly deep understanding of autoimmune disorders. By the end, she'd outlined a comprehensive plan. The foundation would cover the experimental treatment in full plus Emma's ongoing medication follow-up care. Everything. When Michael and David left the foundation offices that morning, it was with a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope. The treatment could start as soon as next week. Emma might have a real chance at stabilization at a future that extended beyond 6 months. But life had taught Michael not to trust in easy solutions. As they drove toward the hospital for Emma's regular checkup, doubt crept in, whispering warnings. What if the treatment didn't work? What if the foundation changed its mind? What if this was all an elaborate setup for some purpose? He couldn't yet see. David watched his brother's face darken with suspicion. You're looking for the trap, aren't you? His voice held no judgment, only understanding. Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter. There's always a trap, Dave. Nothing comes for free, especially not $200,000 worth of medical treatment. David shook his head, snow-covered streets rolling past the windows. Sometimes good things happen, Mikey. Not often, I'll give you that. But sometimes. Michael wanted to believe that, wanted to trust in unexpected kindness, in solutions appearing when most needed. But experience had taught him harsh lessons about hope, about believing things would work out. They rarely did, and never without a price. At the hospital, Dr. Patel delivered news that confirmed Michael's darkest fears. Emma's condition had deteriorated significantly in just 2 weeks. Her kidney function was down to 28%, stage 4 renal disease. Without intervention, complete kidney failure was now a matter of months, possibly weeks. Michael shared the news about the Chambers Foundation, about the funding for the experimental treatment. Dr. Patel's relief was palpable. He'd been fighting for this treatment for months, convinced it was Emma's best chance. We can start next week. I'll put in the order for the medication today. For the first time in years, Michael left a doctor's appointment feeling something dangerously close to hope. That feeling lasted precisely 43 minutes, the time it took to drive home and find Emma collapsed on the bathroom floor, her skin gray, her breathing shallow. The ambulance ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Michael's life. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, her pulse weak and thready. The paramedics worked with quiet efficiency, starting an IV, checking vitals, radioing ahead to the emergency department. Michael sat beside the stretcher, holding Emma's cold hand, promising her everything would be okay, a promise he had no power to keep. At the hospital, Emma was whisked away for tests while Michael and David waited in a sterile consultation room, the minutes stretching into hours. When Dr. Patel finally appeared, his expression confirmed Michael's worst fears. Emma has suffered acute kidney injury on top of her chronic disease. Her creatinine levels are dangerously high. We need to start dialysis immediately and the experimental treatment as soon as possible. Every hour we delay increases the risk of permanent damage. Michael felt the floor shift beneath him, reality tilting on its axis. How soon can we start the treatment? Dr. Patel hesitated, glancing between Michael and David. Normally, we'd need to stabilize her on dialysis for at least a week before beginning such an aggressive therapy. But given the rapid progression of her disease, I'd recommend starting as soon as she's stable enough, possibly in 48 to 72 hours. The problem is the medication. Even with the foundation's commitment, it takes time to process the paperwork. Get approval, order the drugs. Michael's hands curled into fists. How much time? 2 weeks at minimum, sometimes a month. 2 weeks, a month. Time Emma didn't have. Michael's mind raced, calculating, planning. Could he get a loan? Sell the truck? Rob a bank? None of it would come close to the amount needed. What if I paid out of pocket just for the first treatment? to get her started while we wait for the foundation paperwork. Dr. Patel's expression was sympathetic but realistic. The first dose alone cost $37,000, Mr. Reed. I don't say this to be cruel, but I know. I can't afford it. The admission burned like acid in Michael's throat. He couldn't afford to save his daughter's life. What kind of father did that make him? They moved Emma to the intensive care unit, a maze of beeping machines and sterile surfaces. She looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires, connecting her to monitors and IV bags. Michael sat beside her, David keeping vigil in the corner, both men silent with the weight of helplessness. Hours passed, nurses came and went. Emma's condition stabilized slightly with emergency treatment, but Dr. Patel's warning echoed in Michael's mind. They needed to start the experimental therapy as soon as possible. Every hour of delay meant more damage to her kidneys, more risk of complete failure. Night fell. David convinced Michael to take a break, get some coffee, stretch his legs. In the hospital cafeteria, Michael stared into a cup of bitter coffee, its surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. He felt hollowed out, emptied of everything but fear. That's when Elizabeth Chambers found him. She appeared at his table without warning, still in professional attire as if she'd come directly from court. I heard about Emma. Our foundation has contacts at the hospital. She sat across from him, setting a leather portfolio on the table between them. Tell me what the doctors are saying. Michael repeated Dr. Patel's assessment mechanically, too exhausted for pride or pretense. The words tumbled out: acute kidney injury, dialysis, experimental treatment, time running out. Elizabeth listened without interruption, her expression grave. When he finished, she opened the portfolio and removed several documents. I've expedited everything. The foundation board met in emergency session this afternoon. She pushed the papers across the table. The treatment has been approved and paid for in full. The medication will be delivered tomorrow morning. Dr. Patel can start as soon as Emma is stable enough. Michael stared at the documents, unable to process what he was hearing. Tomorrow, but you said it would take weeks. Elizabeth's smile was tired but genuine. That's for normal cases. This is Emma. Her gaze held his, an unexpected connection bridging the gulf between their worlds. I made a promise to my son before he died. I couldn't save him, but I swore I would save others. This is personal for me, Michael. This is Matthew's legacy. Michael wanted to thank her, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he asked the question that had been haunting him since their first meeting. Why did you recuse yourself from my case? You could have helped us win against Northeast. Elizabeth's expression shifted, professionalism giving way to raw honesty. Because sometimes justice is too slow. You need help now, not after months or years of legal battles. And because I learned the hard way that winning a lawsuit doesn't bring back what you've lost. She'd made a choice: give up the power to change the system to save one child immediately. Michael understood that choice better than most. After all, wasn't he doing the same thing, abandoning the fight against Northeast Insurance to get Emma the treatment she needed now? He gathered the documents with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the weight of Elizabeth's intervention, by the sudden shift from desperation to possibility. I don't know how to thank you. Elizabeth stood, gathering her things. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Emma is better. She paused, her professional demeanor returning. There's something else we should discuss, but not tonight. When Emma is stable, when you've had some rest, I'd like to talk to you about a position at the foundation. Before Michael could respond, she was gone, leaving him with the approved treatment paperwork and a new bewildering question. A position at the foundation. What could someone like him possibly offer an organization run by people like Elizabeth Chambers? The next 24 hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and cautious optimism. The medication arrived as promised, the experimental treatment prepared under Dr. Patel's supervision. Emma remained unconscious, her body too weak to fight its way back to awareness, but her vital signs stabilized. The dialysis removed the dangerous buildup of toxins in her blood. The first dose of the experimental therapy was administered without complications. All Michael could do was wait and hope, and try not to think about how quickly their lives had changed from desperate fear to fragile possibility in less than a day. David remained by his side, a solid presence in the shifting landscape of the ICU. Rick from the warehouse called to check on Emma, offering to cover Michael's shifts to speak to the supervisor. The kindness of others surrounded him, a safety net, appearing where he'd expected only to fall. By the third day, Emma showed signs of improvement. Her kidney function stabilized. Her blood work revealed decreasing inflammation. Dr. Patel was cautiously optimistic, though careful not to promise too much too soon. The experimental treatment was working as hoped, but Emma's body had taken a significant hit. Recovery would be measured in weeks and months, not days. On the fourth day, she woke up. Michael was dozing in the chair beside her bed when a weak squeeze of his hand jolted him awake. Emma's eyes were open, confused, but aware. "Dad." Her voice was barely a whisper hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed the day before. Michael's vision blurred with tears as he leaned closer. "Hey, kiddo, you gave us quite a scare." Emma's gaze traveled around the hospital room, taking in the equipment, the IV lines of the monitors. Her brow furrowed with the effort of piecing together what had happened. "How long? 4 days?" Michael brushed hair from her forehead, his touch gentle on her pale skin. "You're going to be okay. Dr. Patel started you on the experimental treatment. It's working, Em." She processed this information slowly, confusion giving way to understanding, then disbelief. The treatment, but how? The insurance? Michael hesitated, unsure how to explain Elizabeth Chambers, the foundation, the sudden salvation from an unexpected quarter. "A foundation is covering it. All of it. The woman I helped in the snowstorm, she runs it. Her son had a disease similar to yours. She lost him. She's helping us now." Emma's eyes widened slightly, the information too much to absorb in her weakened state. But her next question cut straight to the heart of what Michael had been avoiding. "What about the lawsuit if we don't need the insurance money now?" Michael squeezed her hand gently. "We're still fighting. Different judge, longer odds, but we're not giving up. It's not just about us anymore, Em. It's about changing the system for the next family." Emma nodded, her eyelids growing heavy again. Before drifting back to sleep, she murmured words that would echo in Michael's mind for days to come. "Sometimes you have to accept help to become strong enough to help others." Where had his 15-year-old daughter learned such wisdom? Not from him, surely. He'd spent years teaching her self-reliance, pride, and standing on your own 2 feet, suspicion of help that came too easily. Yet here she was, accepting grace with more maturity than he'd managed in 52 years of life. As Emma recovered over the next week, Michael had time to reflect on Elizabeth's unexpected job offer. David had returned to his construction job in Duluth, promising to visit in 2 weeks. Rick and the other warehouse workers had pooled resources to send flowers and a gift card for groceries. Michael's shift supervisor had surprisingly granted him emergency family leave unpaid, but at least his job would be waiting when he returned. Elizabeth visited the hospital twice, bringing books for Emma, checking on her progress, never mentioning the job offer, until Emma was moved from the ICU to a regular room, her condition officially upgraded to stable. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, with Emma sleeping peacefully after her second treatment, Elizabeth found Michael in the hospital cafeteria again. This time she carried a different folder, thinner, with the Chambers Foundation logo embossed on its cover. "I meant what I said about a position at the foundation," she began without preamble, sliding into the seat across from him. "We need someone like you, Michael. Someone who understands what these families are going through because he's lived it." Michael stared at her, bemused. "I'm a mechanic and warehouse worker. What could I possibly do at your foundation?" Elizabeth opened the folder, revealing a job description for family advocate and application specialist. "We review hundreds of applications each month. Most are legitimate, but some try to game the system. We need someone who can tell the difference, someone with real experience, not just academic knowledge. Someone who can look at an application and see the human beings behind the paperwork." Michael scanned the document, skepticism warring with interest. The salary listed was nearly triple what he made at the warehouse, plus benefits, including comprehensive health insurance that would cover both him and Emma. It seemed impossible, another too-good-to-be-true moment in a week filled with them. "Why me?" Michael set the paper down, meeting Elizabeth's gaze directly. "You have lawyers, doctors, professional people working for you. I don't fit in that world." Elizabeth's response came without hesitation, delivered with judicial certainty. "Because you stopped in a snowstorm when you had every reason not to. Because you understand the value, not just cost. Because when you look at these applications, you'll see people, not cases." The job description blurred as Michael considered her words. He'd spent his life working with his hands, fixing engines, moving pallets, building, and repairing concrete things. This job would be different, abstract, subjective. helping decide who received the foundation's limited resources, whose children got treatment, and whose didn't. It was an awesome responsibility, one he wasn't sure he was qualified to bear. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "I'm not educated like you. I don't know the medical terminology, the legal language." Elizabeth smiled, the expression warming her formal features. "That's exactly why we need you. You'll ask the questions our experts don't think to ask. You'll see the desperation behind the politeness, the fear behind the calm requests. You'll know what it feels like to be on the other side of that desk." Michael thought of Emma, of her wisdom beyond her years. Sometimes you have to accept help to become strong enough to help others. Was this what she meant? Taking this position would mean leaving behind the work he'd done his entire life, starting over at 52, learning a new skill set, navigating a new world. It was terrifying. And yet he could see the purpose in it, the meaning, using his hard-won experience to help other families avoid the desperation he had felt. Being the person he'd needed during those long, dark days when Emma's medication ran out and the bills piled up and hope seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. "When can I start?" The words surprised him as much as they seemed to please Elizabeth. "As soon as Emma is discharged and settled, we can work around her treatment schedule, flexible hours at first." She gathered the papers, clearly satisfied with his decision. "The foundation will be better for having you, Michael. And I think you might be better for having the foundation." As she left, Michael remained in the cafeteria contemplating the abrupt turn his life had taken. 2 weeks ago, he'd been a desperate father, working a dead-end job, watching his daughter's health deteriorate, powerless to stop it. Now Emma was receiving life-saving treatment, and he was about to start a job that paid well and might actually make a difference in the world. All because he'd stopped to help a stranded driver in a snowstorm. All because in his darkest moment, he'd still found the capacity for kindness. It seemed too simple, too poetic to be real. And yet here he was. Michael returned to Emma's room, finding her awake and reading one of the books Elizabeth had brought. Her color was better today, her breathing easier. The experimental treatment was working, not a cure the doctors cautioned, but a way to slow the disease, to stabilize her condition, to buy time for her kidneys to recover. Time. That's all he'd ever wanted. Time for Emma to grow up, to live her life, to become the remarkable woman she was already showing signs of being. Time that had seemed to be running out, but now stretched before them again, not guaranteed, but possible. Hopeful. "Hey, Dad." Emma set her book aside, studying his face with the unnerving perception she'd always possessed. "You look different, less worried." Michael sat beside her bed, taking her thin hand in his. "Remember that job at the foundation Judge Chambers mentioned? I'm taking it." Emma's smile bloomed slowly, transforming her pale face. "Good." Her fingers tightened around his. "You're good at fixing things, Dad, not just cars, people too." Michael wasn't so sure about that. He'd failed to fix Catherine after the accident, had nearly failed to save Emma. But maybe, just maybe, he could help fix the broken system that forced parents to choose between bankruptcy and their children's lives. Maybe that was a repair job worthy of the skills he'd spent a lifetime developing. Outside the hospital window, fresh snow was falling, covering Minnesota in another white blanket. But unlike the blizzard 2 weeks ago, this snow fell gently, peacefully, transforming the world without violence. Michael watched it accumulate on the windowsill, on the bare branches of trees, on the rooftops of the city beyond. A blank page, a fresh start, a second chance he hadn't dared hope for, but now stretched before him, unexpected and precious. Not just for Emma, but for himself as well. The chance to become something more than he'd been. The chance to use his hard-won knowledge to ease the way for others. The snow continued to fall, erasing what came before, making room for what would come next. 6 months transformed the landscape, not just the Minnesota winter giving way to spring and then summer, but the terrain of Michael and Emma's lives as well. The experimental treatment had stabilized Emma's condition beyond the doctor's most optimistic predictions. Her kidney function, while not normal, had improved to 45% and held steady. The constant fatigue and pain that had shadowed her for years had receded enough that she'd returned to school part-time, even joined the school newspaper. Today marked her 16th birthday and the halfway point of her treatment protocol, 2 milestones worthy of celebration. The Chambers Foundation office hummed with quiet activity as Michael reviewed another application file. His desk, once foreign territory to a man who'd spent his life working with engines rather than paperwork, now felt like a natural extension of himself. 6 months into his role as family advocate, he developed instincts that surprised even him, an ability to read between the lines of medical reports and financial statements, to sense the desperation behind carefully composed emails, to distinguish genuine need from occasional attempts at manipulation. Elizabeth appeared in his office doorway, her formal courtroom attire exchanged for the business casual she wore at the foundation. "You're still here. Thought you'd have left early for Emma's birthday." Michael closed the file, stretching shoulders stiff from hours hunched over documents. Just finishing up the Henderson case. Their son's leukemia treatment was denied by the same insurance company that denied Emma's. He tapped the file meaningfully. Same language, same excuses. It's like they're working from a template designed to reject life-saving care. Elizabeth entered, taking the visitor chair across from his desk. "They are. I've seen dozens of these cases over the years. Same phrasing, same denial codes. The names change, but the story remains identical." She examined Michael thoughtfully. "You've become quite the expert in insurance rejection patterns." Michael hadn't expected to find purpose in this work, had thought of it initially as a means to an end, a way to provide for Emma while she recovered. But somewhere between the first application he had reviewed and the 20th family he had helped navigate the medical bureaucracy, he discovered a calling. His experience as a desperate father fighting the system, combined with the practical problem-solving skills honed over decades as a mechanic, gave him a unique perspective the foundation had previously lacked. "I approved the Hendersons this morning," Elizabeth continued. "The first treatment is scheduled for next week. And Michael, the board was impressed with your assessment. Your instincts were right about expediting their case." A small victory, but Michael had learned to treasure these moments. Concrete proof that his work mattered, that children like Ethan Henderson would receive treatment because he had recognized the urgency in their situation. Each approval felt like repayment of the debt he owed for Emma's care, though Elizabeth insisted no such debt existed. Their working relationship had evolved over the month's initial awkwardness, giving way to mutual respect, then genuine friendship. Elizabeth's razor-sharp legal mind complemented Michael's practical approach. Together, they'd streamline the foundation's application process, reducing wait times and improving follow-up care. Their success stories were mounting, their failures becoming rarer as they refined their methods. "You should get going," Elizabeth suggested, glancing at her watch. "Emma's party starts in an hour, and I still need to pick up the cake." The casual way Elizabeth had inserted herself into their lives still occasionally caught Michael off guard. She'd begun as Emma's benefactor, become Michael's employer, and somehow transformed into a friend to them both, attending Emma's treatment sessions, bringing books and magazines during hospital stays, helping with homework during recovery. The boundary between professional obligation and personal investment had blurred months ago. Michael gathered his things, locking the Henderson file in his drawer. "You're sure you don't mind picking up the cake? I could swing by the bakery." Elizabeth waved away his concern. "I ordered it weeks ago, special design with that science fiction series she loves. Besides, you need to get home and set up. David's flight gets in when my brother texted an hour ago his plane landed early. He's probably already at the house wondering where I am." Michael smiled at the thought of David with Emma, likely entertaining her with exaggerated stories of his latest construction project while they waited for Michael to arrive. As they walked to the parking lot, Michael noticed Elizabeth checking her phone repeatedly, a small furrow between her brows. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Just a text from Judge Pearson about your case against Northeast. Looks like they've filed another motion to dismiss. Standard delay tactic, nothing to worry about today." She pocketed her phone with finality. No insurance talk on Emma's birthday. That's the rule. Michael nodded through the reminder of the ongoing lawsuit settled like a weight in his chest. Despite Elizabeth's recusal, she'd kept tabs on the case through colleagues offering insights and suggestions to Ms. Torres. The lawsuit continued its glacial progress through the legal system, every victory met with appeals, every hearing followed by motions and counter-motions. Northeast Insurance had deep pockets and an army of lawyers working to ensure Michael's case never established a precedent that might cost them millions in similar claims. The irony wasn't lost on Michael. Emma was receiving the treatment, her health improving weekly, yet they continued fighting a legal battle that no longer directly affected her care. But it had never been just about Emma. It was about the next family, and the one after that about changing a system designed to profit from denying treatment rather than providing it. Michael and Elizabeth parted ways in the parking lot with promises to meet at the house in an hour. The drive home gave Michael time to reflect on the whirlwind of the past 6 months, how quickly necessity had become purpose, how strangers had become something close to family. His life had been rebuilt from the ground up like an engine disassembled and put back together with improved parts. The rental house came into view, David's rental car already in the driveway alongside the new-to-them Honda that had replaced Michael's failing truck. The modest home looked different now, not just the fresh paint and repaired porch steps, but the sense of permanence that had been missing when each day felt borrowed against Emma's declining health. Inside, laughter greeted him, Emma and David in the kitchen, surrounded by party decorations in various stages of assembly. Emma looked up at his entrance, her face fuller than it had been in years, her eyes bright with an energy he'd feared he might never see again. Her dark hair had grown back after the initial treatment, complications now styled in a short bob that framed her face. "Dad, you're late. Uncle Dave's been telling me about the high-rise in Seattle. Apparently, he's essential to preventing the entire building from collapsing." Emma's teasing tone was accompanied by an eye roll that Michael found heartbreakingly normal, the behavior of a typical teenager rather than a chronically ill patient. David grinned, his weathered face relaxed in a way Michael hadn't seen in years, only slightly exaggerating my importance as usual. "Just telling Emma about the structural reinforcement techniques we're using." He crossed to Michael, embracing him with the bear hug that had been their greeting since childhood. "Good to see you, little brother. You're looking almost human these days, less like a zombie and more like a functioning adult." The transformation David referenced wasn't just Emma's improved health, but Michael's as well. The constant exhaustion that had been his companion for years had eased. Regular sleep, decent pay, and the gradual lifting of crushing worry had erased some of the premature aging from his face. He'd even started working out at the small gym in the foundation building during lunch breaks, rebuilding strength depleted by years of stress and physical labor. Emma's birthday party unfolded with the controlled chaos of any teenage gathering. A small group of friends from school and the hospital, David playing the role of fun Uncle, Elizabeth arriving with the promised cake, a remarkably detailed replica of Emma's favorite fictional spaceship. Michael watched from the periphery, still sometimes disbelieving that this was their life. Now not perfect, not without ongoing medical concerns, but stable, hopeful. Elizabeth found him in this quiet observation, handing him a plate of cake. "Penny, for your thoughts." Michael accepted the dessert, struggling to articulate the complex emotions swirling beneath his contentment. "A year ago, I didn't think we'd be here. I wasn't sure Emma would see 16. Now look at her arguing with her friends about movie characters planning for college." He shook his head in wonder. "Sometimes I'm afraid to believe it's real." Elizabeth's gaze followed his to where Emma sat, surrounded by her small circle of friends, some healthy, some clearly patients themselves, and all engaged in animated conversation. "It's real, Michael. The treatment is working. Emma's kidneys are stable. She's responding better than anyone predicted." She didn't voice the unspoken qualifier that haunted all medical miracles for now. The experimental treatment wasn't a cure, just a way to halt the progression of a disease that would always be lurking, waiting for an opportunity to advance. Emma would need ongoing care, medication monitoring. But the immediate crisis had passed, the constant edge of terror dulled to manageable concern. As the party wound down, guests departing with leftover cake and goodie bags, Michael found himself in the quiet kitchen with Elizabeth. David had taken Emma and two of her closest friends for ice cream, a birthday tradition revived now that Emma's dietary restrictions had eased. The momentary solitude with Elizabeth felt both comfortable and charged with unspoken possibility. Their relationship had evolved in unpredictable ways over the months, professional respect deepening to friendship, then to something neither had explicitly acknowledged. Shared meals after late workdays, long conversations about the foundation, about Emma's progress, about Elizabeth's court cases, and Michael's adjustment to office life. Small, meaningful gestures, Elizabeth bringing coffee exactly how he liked it on difficult mornings, Michael fixing her car when it needed maintenance rather than sending it to a shop. Elizabeth broke the comfortable silence, her fingers tracing patterns on the countertop. "The board meeting yesterday, I didn't get a chance to tell you. They approved the expansion of the Family Advocate Program. We'll be hiring 2 more people with backgrounds similar to yours, parents who've been through the system." Michael looked up from the dishes he was rinsing, genuinely surprised. That's your project, the one you've been working on for months. Congratulations. Elizabeth's smile held satisfaction, but also something more vulnerable. Our project, Michael. Your success these past 6 months is what convinced them. The way you connect with families, how you've streamlined the evaluation process. You've proven the concept works. The praise settled warmly in Michael's chest. He'd spent decades being good at his job, respected by customers who appreciated his mechanical skills, valued by employers for his work ethic. But this was different, making a difference in a realm he'd never imagined, entering changing systems rather than just fixing machines. I've been thinking, Elizabeth continued, her tone shifting to something more personal. About the future, about us. The word hung between them, us, small but significant. Michael set down the plate he was washing, giving her his full attention. The possibility of us had been circling for months, neither willing to disrupt the delicate balance they'd established. I know we've been careful, Elizabeth acknowledged. Professional at work, friends outside of it. But I think we've been dancing around something that deserves to be named. She met his gaze directly, the same forthright approach she brought to everything. I care about you, Michael. And not just as Emma's father or as a foundation employee. Michael dried his hands, slowly buying time to organize thoughts that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. When Catherine died, I never expected to feel this way again. Never thought I'd want to. He moved closer, the kitchen island no longer separating them. And then a snowstorm stranded a certain federal judge, and somehow everything changed. Elizabeth's laugh was soft, tinged with wonder at the unlikely sequence of events that had brought them together. Not exactly how I planned to meet someone either, especially not someone who would challenge everything I thought I knew about courage and strength. The moment stretched between them, possibility crystallizing into intention. When Michael finally leaned forward to kiss her, it felt less like a first move and more like a natural progression of a journey begun months ago on a snow-covered highway. Elizabeth responded with equal certainty, her hand coming to rest against his chest. When they separated, Michael found himself smiling, a genuine expression that reached his eyes in a way that had become more frequent, but still felt like rediscovering a long-lost ability. So what does this mean for work? He asked, practical considerations asserting themselves. Are there rules about this sort of thing? Elizabeth's eyes danced with amusement. The Foundation's anti-nepotism policy specifically prohibits supervision of romantic partners or family members. She smoothed his collar absently, which is why, as of yesterday's board meeting, you officially report to Marcus in program development rather than directly to me. I may have anticipated this conversation. Michael laughed, unsurprised by her foresight. Of course you did, always 10 steps ahead. Not always, she admitted, vulnerability softening her features. Matthew's illness taught me that some things can't be planned for or controlled. That sometimes all your preparation means nothing against the randomness of life. The mention of her son, a subject she rarely broached directly, underscored the significance of the moment. They were both marked by loss, shaped by battles against systems designed to deny help to those most in need. Perhaps that shared understanding formed the foundation of whatever was growing between them, not despite their wounds, but because of them. The sound of a car in the driveway signaled David's return with Emma and her friends. Elizabeth stepped back, though her smile remained intimate, a private acknowledgement of the boundary they just crossed. Later, she promised, we'll talk more when there aren't teenagers with sugar highs invading. The evening concluded with quiet celebration, David entertaining everyone with stories from his construction adventures, Elizabeth fitting seamlessly into their family dynamic, Emma glowing with simple happiness at having the people she cared about together in one place. When the last friend had been picked up and Emma had retreated to her room with new books and gift cards, the adults gathered in the living room, conversation flowing easily among them. David departed for his hotel near midnight, extracting promises of breakfast before his flight the next day. Elizabeth lingered, helping with final cleanup, the new awareness between her and Michael creating a gentle current beneath ordinary actions. When she finally left with a kiss goodnight and plans to talk the following evening, Michael felt a lightness he had almost forgotten was possible. He checked on Emma before heading to bed himself, finding her awake despite the late hours, scrolling through photos from the party on her phone. Good birthday, he asked, sitting at the edge of her bed, like he had countless times during her illness, though now to share joy rather than monitor symptoms. Emma set her phone aside, her expression thoughtful beyond her years, the best in a long time. She studied him with that perceptive gaze that sometimes made him wonder who was the parent and who the child. You and Elizabeth seem different tonight. Good different. Michael considered deflecting, then decided against it. Emma had earned his honesty through years of facing hard truths about her health. We're figuring things out. It's new. But yes, good different. Emma's smile bloomed slowly. I like her dad. She gets you. Not just the obvious stuff, she sees the part of you that needs to fix things to make broken systems work. She understands that's who you are at your core. The observation struck Michael with its accuracy. Elizabeth did see him, not just his circumstances or his background, but the essential drive that had defined his life long before Emma's illness. The need to repair what was broken, whether engines or leaves or systems. Sleep found him easily that night, a luxury still novel enough to appreciate his mind turning not to worries, but to possibilities. For Emma, for himself, for a future that had seemed impossible a year ago. Winter returned to Minnesota with predictable ferocity, though this year Michael faced it with resources he hadn't possessed during the previous one, a reliable car, a well-insulated home, sufficient funds for heating bills, and most importantly, a daughter whose health continued to stabilize rather than decline. Emma's 16th birthday had given way to Christmas, then New Year's, and now February marked the one-year anniversary of their lives changing course. The foundation workload had increased with the program expansion, more families to evaluate, more cases to monitor, more systems to navigate. Michael now supervised two other family advocates, both parents of chronically ill children, both bringing unique perspectives to the work. His relationship with Elizabeth had deepened their professional and personal lives, finding comfortable boundaries that allowed both to flourish. The ongoing lawsuit against Northeast Insurance continued its tortuous path through the legal system, victories and setbacks in equal measure though. Mrs. Torres remained cautiously optimistic about their chances of eventually prevailing. The case had drawn attention from advocacy groups and medical rights organizations, potentially impacting how insurance companies handled experimental treatments for rare diseases. On this particular February evening, Michael was driving home from a late foundation meeting, snow falling in gentle contrast to last year's blizzard. The same stretch of highway where he'd encountered Elizabeth now lay peaceful beneath fresh powder streetlights, casting pools of yellow across untouched white. He'd promised to pick up dinner on his way home. Emma was studying for midterms, Elizabeth working late at the courthouse on a difficult case. The headlights illuminated something unexpected through the curtain of falling snow. A vehicle pulled to the shoulder, the hazard lights blinking weakly. Michael slowed memories of last February rising unbidden. Another stranded driver, another choice. Though his circumstances had changed dramatically, the decision required no thought. He pulled over just as he had a year ago for reasons that had nothing to do with calculation and everything to do with basic decency. The stranded vehicle was an older sedan clearly struggling against the Minnesota winter. A woman stood beside it, phone in hand, frustration evident even from a distance. A child's face peered anxiously from the back seat, a boy about 10 years old bundled against the cold. Car trouble, Michael called, approaching carefully to avoid startling her. The woman looked up, assessing him with the same wariness Elizabeth had shown. Her coat was worn, but clean, her boots practical rather than fashionable. Yes, it just died. We were heading home from my son's doctor's appointment in the city. I've been trying to call for help, but there's barely any signal out here. Michael nodded, understanding her situation with intimate familiarity. Mind if I take a look? I'm a mechanic, or I was. He gestured toward the hood of her car. Relief flickered across her face, warring with natural caution. That would be really helpful. Thank you, I'm Rachel. That's my son Tyler in the back. Michael introduced himself as he examined the engine, quickly identifying the problem, a broken alternator belt, similar to Elizabeth's issue a year ago, but complicated by an overheated engine. Not something fixable on the roadside in February. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the interior of the car already growing cold without the heater running. You'll need a tow, but it's going to be a long wait in this weather. I can give you and your son a ride. There's a hotel at the next exit where you can wait somewhere warm. Michael offered the same solution he'd provided Elizabeth, understanding both the necessity and the awkwardness of accepting help from a stranger. Rachel hesitated, glancing at her son in the back seat, clearly weighing stranger danger against the very real threat of the plummeting temperature. Before she could respond, the boy started coughing, a deep, concerning sound that Michael recognized instantly from Emma's worst days. Rachel turned immediately, maternal concern overriding all other considerations. She opened the back door, helping the boy sit forward as the coughing fit continued. "Do you need your inhaler?" The boy nodded, unable to speak through the coughing. Rachel dug frantically through her purse, producing an inhaler that the child clutched gratefully, taking 2 measured puffs, as he'd clearly been taught. The medication helped, but Michael noticed the boy's breathing remained labored, his lips taking on a faint bluish tinge visible even in the dim light. "He has cystic fibrosis," Rachel explained, worry etching lines around her eyes. "The cold air can trigger episodes. We need to get him somewhere warm." The medical emergency eliminated any remaining hesitation. They quickly transferred Tyler to Michael's warm car, along with an oxygen concentrator and medication bag that spoke volumes about the seriousness of the boy's condition. Rachel grabbed essentials from their vehicle, and within minutes they were back on the highway, heater blasting. In the back seat, Tyler's breathing gradually eased as the medication took effect and warm air filled his struggling lungs. Rachel maintained a stream of quiet encouragement, her focus entirely on her son, rather than the stranger driving them to safety. The scene was achingly familiar to Michael. How many times had he monitored Emma's breathing with that same laser focus, that same mixture of love and terror? At the hotel, Michael helped them inside carrying the oxygen equipment, while Rachel supported Tyler. The warmth of the lobby brought immediate relief, color returning to the boy's pale face. While Rachel checked in, Michael found himself sitting beside Tyler, whose curious gaze now assessed him between controlled breaths. "My dad used to be a mechanic too." Tyler offered, his voice slightly wheezy but stronger. "Before he left. He taught me about engines sometimes." The simple statement contained volumes, absent father financial struggle, likely accompanying the medical challenges, a child growing up too fast under the weight of adult realities. Michael recognized the pattern from Emma's experiences from dozens of families he'd worked with at the foundation. "Engines are good to understand," Michael agreed, matching the boy's matter-of-fact tone. "They follow rules. If something's not working, there's always a reason you can find if you look hard enough." Unlike some things, Tyler nodded sagely, wisdom beyond his years evident in his serious eyes. "Like CF, the doctors still don't know why some medicines work for some people and not others." His gaze shifted to his mother at the front desk, lowering his voice. "Mom's been trying to get insurance to approve a new treatment. They keep saying no." The familiar story twisted in Michael's chest, another family fighting the same battle he and Emma had faced, another child's life balanced against corporate profit margins. Before he could respond, Rachel returned with room keys and renewed gratitude for Michael's assistance. "I can't thank you enough for stopping. Most people would have driven past." She extended her hand to shake his. "I need to get Tyler settled, get his evening treatment started." She hesitated, clearly wondering how to conclude this unexpected encounter. Michael made a decision, reaching into his wallet for one of his foundation business cards. Not the standard ones with just his name and contact information, but the special versions Elizabeth had created for exactly this type of situation. For families in crisis who might never find the foundation through official channels. "I work for an organization that helps families dealing with chronic childhood illnesses," he explained, handing her the card. "Especially when insurance companies refuse necessary treatments." His gaze met hers, directly recognizing the desperate calculation in her eyes, the same one he'd performed countless times. "Call the number tomorrow. Tell them Michael Reed sent you. We can help." Rachel stared at the card as if it might vanish, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. "Why would you? What's the catch?" "No catch," Michael assured her, with the certainty of someone who had asked the same question and discovered the answer firsthand. "The foundation was created by someone who lost their child because help came too late. We're trying to make sure that doesn't happen to other families." Tyler had been watching this exchange with the hypervigilance common to children whose survival depends on adult decisions. With the directness unique to kids, he asked the question his mother was too polite to voice. "Are you rich or something?" Michael smiled, recognizing the assumption that only wealthy philanthropists could offer meaningful help. "No, not rich at all. A year ago, I was in your mom's position, stranded on this same highway, daughter, with a rare disease insurance denying treatment. Someone stopped to help me that night too. This is just passing it forward." The words resonated with Rachel, her skepticism softening. She tucked the card carefully into her wallet, as if handling something precious. "I'll call tomorrow. Thank you for everything. After ensuring they were safely settled in the hotel, Michael continued his journey home, the encounter stirring memories of his own desperate days. He called Elizabeth from the car, sharing the experience, asking her to watch for Rachel's call the next day. His voice grew passionate as he described Tyler's condition, the mother's obvious struggle, the familiar pattern of insurance denial for a promising treatment. Elizabeth listened attentively, then promised to expedite the case personally when Rachel called. By the time Michael arrived home, she had already emailed the foundation's intake coordinator, flagging the case for immediate review upon contact. Emma was still awake when he arrived, textbooks spread across the kitchen table, study notes organized with characteristic precision. She looked up as he entered, immediately reading his expression. "What happened? You've got that look!" Michael set down the takeout food he'd eventually remembered to pick up, recounting the highway encounter while preparing plates. Emma listened with growing interest, particularly when he described Tyler's condition and the insurance situation. "So they might become foundation clients," she asked, setting aside her study materials to make room for dinner. "That's amazing, Dad." Full circle moment. The observation struck Michael with its accuracy. A year ago, he'd been Rachel, desperate, out of options, fighting a system designed to outlast his resources. Now he was in a position to offer the same lifeline Elizabeth had extended to him. The symmetry felt significant, a balancing of cosmic scales. Later that evening, after Emma had returned to studying and Michael was reviewing case files at the kitchen table, his phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "Just got out of court. Heading home. Everything okay there?" The simple exchange, checking in, confirming plans, sharing their days, had become a comfortable routine. More than the dramatic moments or official relationship milestones, these ordinary communications represented the real transformation in Michael's life. The steady presence of someone who cared, who understood, who shared his values and priorities. "All good," he replied. "Emma's buried in biology notes. Dinner in the fridge for you if you're hungry when you get home." He hesitated only a moment before adding, "I love you." The words still felt new, though they'd been exchanged for months now. Each time they carried the weight of second chances for him after Catherine's death, for Elizabeth after years of solitary grief for Matthew. Her response came quickly. "Love you too. Be home in 20. Home. The concept had expanded beyond the physical structure, beyond the walls and roof that sheltered them, to encompass the connections they'd built. Family reconfigured not by blood alone, but by choice, by shared purpose, by the understanding that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, a foundation grant, a new treatment protocol, a stranger stopping on a snowy highway. Michael set aside his work and moved to make fresh coffee, knowing Elizabeth would welcome it after a long day in court. Through the kitchen window, snow continued to fall softly on Minnesota, transforming the landscape into something new yet familiar, much like the life he now inhabited. Not perfect, not without ongoing challenges, but infused with a hope that had once seemed impossible. In the quiet moment before Elizabeth's arrival, Michael found himself thinking of the small stone he'd carried in his pocket for years after Emma's diagnosis, the physical manifestation of the weight he'd borne silently. Somewhere in the past year, he'd set it down without noticing. Not because the reality of Emma's condition had disappeared, she would always need monitoring, medication, vigilance against relapse, but because he no longer carried it alone. Sometimes you have to accept help to become strong enough to help others. Emma's wisdom echoed in his mind as he heard Elizabeth's key in the lock, as the door opened to admit her, along with a swirl of snowflakes. The circle completed, from receiving help to giving it, from desperate father to advocate, from stranger to family. Elizabeth stamped snow from her boots in the entryway, her smile warming as she caught sight of Michael. "You wouldn't believe the day I've had." She shed her coat and scarf, moving naturally into the space they now shared several nights a week. "But first, any word from that family you helped Rachel and Tyler?" Michael handed her the coffee he'd prepared, their fingers brushing, in the exchange a small, ordinary intimacy that still felt miraculous. "She called the foundation this afternoon. Initial screening is already complete. Her son meets all the criteria. He's a perfect candidate for the program." Elizabeth sipped her coffee, satisfaction evident in her expression. "They're lucky you found them. Some families never make it to us, too overwhelmed by the daily struggle to even know help exists." Michael thought of how close he'd come to driving past Elizabeth's stranded Lexus a year ago, how easily his own story might have taken a different, darker turn. "Not luck," he corrected gently. "Just people helping people." the way it should always work, but rarely does. They moved together into the kitchen, where Emma looked up briefly from her studies to greet Elizabeth before returning to her notes with teenage intensity. The domestic scene, ordinary, peaceful, filled with purpose, represented everything Michael had feared lost during those darkest days when Emma's medication ran out and hope seemed a luxury he couldn't afford. As he and Elizabeth settled into their evening routine, sharing details of their days, discussing foundation cases, planning weekend activities with Emma and Michael reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed crisis into opportunity, strangers into family desperation, into purpose. The snow outside continued its gentle accumulation, covering the hard edges of the world with something softer, something that promised renewal. In the morning, he would go to the foundation, help another family navigate the labyrinth of medical bureaucracy, continue the work that had unexpectedly become his calling. Emma would attend her classes, manage her ongoing treatment with increasingly independent responsibility, build the future that had once seemed impossibly distant. Elizabeth would preside over her courtrooms, seek justice within an imperfect system, then return to them, this makeshift family forged in crisis and sustained by choice. The universe rarely offered neat conclusions or perfect justice. Michael had learned that lesson through years of struggle, but occasionally, if you were paying attention, it provided moments of grace, opportunities to complete circles, to transform personal suffering into communal healing, to stop on a snowy highway and change the trajectory of lives in ways no one could predict. Outside, the snow fell steadily, erasing what came before making room for what would come next. A blank page, a fresh start, a second chance Michael hadn't dared hope for, but now stretched before him, unexpected and precious. Not just for Emma, but for himself as well. The chance to become something more than he'd been. The chance to use his hard-won knowledge to ease the way for others. The weight he'd carried for so long, the stone in his pocket, the burden of solitary responsibility, had been set down somewhere along the way. Not forgotten, but transformed into something else entirely. A foundation upon which to build a future he could never have imagined. That desperate night on a snow-covered highway, when hope was just a word, and salvation came in the unexpected form of a stranded judge, with a broken serpentine belt, and a mission born from her own unimaginable loss. Tomorrow, Rachel would bring Tyler to the foundation. Michael would show them the same kindness Elizabeth had shown him. The experimental treatment would be approved. A child's future would expand beyond the narrow confines of a terminal diagnosis. A mother's shoulders would lighten just a fraction as someone else helped carry the weight she'd borne alone for too long. And somewhere in Minnesota, on some snow-covered highway, another person would stop to help a stranger in need, not because they expected anything in return, not because they calculated advantage or benefit, but simply because it was the decent thing to do. Because sometimes in a world that often seemed designed to reward the worst in human nature, the only rational response was to insist upon kindness anyway, to repair what was broken, to extend a hand, to remember that we save ourselves by saving each other. Emma looked up from her textbook, catching Michael's distant expression. "You're thinking about last year, aren't you? About how different everything is now?" Michael nodded, his daughter's perceptions still occasionally startling, even after 16 years. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed, how close we came to a completely different outcome." Emma closed her book, her expression serious beyond her years. "You know what I think? I think we were always going to end up here one way or another, because you never stopped fighting, never stopped trying to fix things, even when they seemed unfixable." Michael glanced at Elizabeth, who had been listening quietly to this exchange. He thought of the countless small decisions, the seemingly random circumstances, the unexpected kindnesses that had led them all to this moment, sitting around a kitchen table on a snowy February evening, healthy, hopeful together. Maybe some engines are just meant to run, no matter how many times they break down, Elizabeth suggested, her smile acknowledging the mechanical metaphor Michael would appreciate. With the right mechanic, anything can be repaired. Michael reached for her hand across the table, Emma's presence, making the gesture both natural and significant, a family forming and reforming around a core of shared experience. The snow continued to fall outside, covering Minnesota in another white blanket. But unlike the blizzard a year ago, this snow fell gently, peacefully, transforming the world without violence. This time, Michael watched it with something approaching contentment, The knowledge that whatever storms came next, they would face them together. The future stretched before them, uncertain as always, but infinitely more hopeful than it had seemed a year ago. A road not without obstacles, but one they no longer traveled alone.